My name is Marion Hale. I'm 56, and for 30 years I kept other people's books straight, matching invoices to signatures, reconciling pennies that didn't want to be found. On a Friday night in Lakefield, Oregon, I slid my key into my front door, planning to surprise my daughter with an early visit and a pot of stew she loves. The phone rang before the deadbolt turned. A calm voice asked my name, confirmed my relationship, then delivered 6 words that hollowed me out. Your daughter is in the ICU. The drive to St. Matthew's swallowed itself. Fluorescent light bled across polished floors, the kind that squeak beneath nervous souls. I gave my ID, repeated my name twice, signed where they pointed. When they parted the curtain, I saw tubes, a pale shoulder taped to a board, and a monitor writing her heartbeat in green. Sophie, my girl who still whisked egg whites by hand because she liked to earn the peaks. The machine breathed for her with a patience I didn't have. A nurse adjusted a line and asked whether Sophie's husband was on his way. I looked at the empty chair by the bed and told the truth. I didn't know. I called him, voicemail. I texted him the room number and a prayer. If a mother's plea counts as prayer, nothing. I pushed the chair closer and took her cool hand, the one that had once learned to take a child's pulse with 2 gentle fingers. I whispered the ordinary things that stitch a day together. Oh, what the sky looked like. What stew I'd brought. How long I intended to sit, because ordinary is a rope you throw into deep water. Doubt crawled through me first, then anger, then something harder that never cracks, suspicion. The charge nurse asked if there was anyone else she should notify. I said no, and yes, in the same breath, no. There was no one who would care the way I did. Yes, there was someone who should have been here already. That night, 3,000 miles from the hiss of my daughter's ventilator, a card linked to her account would meet a gray waterfront and a credit card terminal that did not blink. Before the sun rose on our side of the country, it would spit out a single cold word that changes the temperature of a man's evening. Declined. The intensivist spoke softly, the way people do when they've learned the edges of human hope. He said Sophie had a head injury, a broken clavicle, and a body that would need time to remember how to do simple things. He explained the drip they used to keep her quiet enough to heal. He confirmed what the chart already said, that she had listed me as her healthcare proxy years ago. After a patient's mother thanked her for having the paperwork that made a terrible day slightly less so, I nodded as if I were in someone else's meeting, then stared at the curve of her hairline beneath a strip of gauze and realized this meeting had no agenda except breath. Lieutenant Javier Mendez from Riverbend County arrived with a square notepad and a careful expression. He asked about the car, about her route home, about arguments I might have overheard. I told him Sophie didn't drink when she was driving, not out of saintliness, but habit. And he told me the tox screen was pending and the data recorder showed speed that made his pencil rest on the page. No sign of another driver, no fresh paint on the guardrail, just a late break and bad luck. He asked if there was anyone who should be here, and I said her husband's name, as if speaking it might make him appear. I stepped into the corridor, where a vending machine hummed like it owed someone money, and opened my email. Old habits, old reflexes. When the world falls apart, you count, you look for numbers that line up. An alert from our bank perched at the top of my inbox. Unusual spending on an account where Sophie was the primary and another cardholder had authorization. The merchant name didn't belong to Oregon. Seabright Marina, Clearwater's sister coast, and then some, the kind of name that smells like diesel and sunscreen even through a screen. There were smaller charges ribboned beside it, ride shares, a hotel with a coral word in it, drinks priced like rent. I called the number on the back of my debit card and listened to the script roll out of the representative's mouth. I gave my name, the account, the secondary user's name, the reason my voice sounded like a piano wire. I asked what could be done to keep Sophie's money from being spent while she couldn't lift her head. The rep was kind but constrained. She said we could discuss options in person, that with documentation she might place a temporary hold, that there were procedures for emergencies. She offered me a morning appointment with the branch manager. I took it, pressed the phone to my cheek, and watched a volunteer in a blue vest pass a cup of water to an old man who asked for it by first name. Back in the room, I told Sophie I would be gone at sunrise and back before the shift changed. Her hand was warm now, or mine had stopped shaking long enough to feel it. My anger found a place to live, not in the helplessness of a chair facing machines, but in the architecture I understood: paperwork, signatures, case numbers. If love is a promise you renew in public, then this was my renewal. I texted Lieutenant Mendez and told him I had transactions he'd want to see. He replied with a time to meet and a thank you that sounded like the start of a ledger. Before I left, I set my phone on the mattress and opened the family location app out of habit. Sophie's phone slept in a pouch on the wall. Her husband's dot did not exist. The map was a clean ocean. I pressed the power button until my reflection in the black glass looked like someone who could add this up, and then I turned out the light over the sink and promised my daughter I would keep counting. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and rain-soaked coats when I stepped through its glass doors the next morning. I had slept in the hospital chair with Sophie's machines clicking a lullaby only they could understand. My hair still smelled of antiseptic when I presented the papers the nurse had helped me compile: the physician's affidavit, the chart notation of incapacitation, and Sophie's long-ago healthcare proxy that carried my name. The clerk glanced at the bundle, then at my face, and guided me to a judge who handled emergency petitions on Saturdays. Judge Halperin read quickly, his glasses sliding down his nose. He asked whether Sophie's husband had been contacted. I answered with the precision of a woman who had reconciled countless ledgers. Repeatedly, voicemail only. The judge nodded once, signed the top page with a tired flourish, and handed me a stamped order granting temporary guardianship. The paper was warm from the copier, and for the first time since the phone call, I had something solid in my hands. From there, I drove to the Grant and Alder branch on Main Street, where the blinds were still half drawn against the morning. Selena, the representative who had answered my call the night before, recognized my voice. She and her manager, Mr. Vaughn, studied the judge's order as if the ink itself might smudge. When they finally looked up, Vaughn said, "With this and the police case number, we can place a fraud hold. Charges made by Mr. Lawson will no longer clear." I thanked them, my voice tighter than I expected. They canceled the secondary card, flagged the account, and promised to forward documentation to law enforcement. I signed 3 times, initialed once, and walked out with copies that felt heavier than their weight. That evening, 3,000 miles away, Trent stood at a marina in Florida, laughing too loudly at a deckhand while presenting Sophie's card for a chartered boat. The terminal blinked once, twice, then screamed "declined" in red letters. His charm slipped, his words turned sharp. Witnesses later described him as agitated, possibly intoxicated. The harbor master, already wary, called patrol officers, who recognized the name from a fugitive warrant out of Oregon. What began as an argument over payment ended in cuffs and a ride in the back of a cruiser. I learned of it when Lieutenant Mendez rang me at dusk. His tone carried the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen too much, but still welcomed a victory. "Mrs. Hale, they have him in custody down in Florida. Theft of services, and he'll face the warrant we issued. He won't be coming back here on his own terms. I pressed the phone against my ear until it hurt, watching Sophie through the ICU window. She shifted beneath her sheets, a flutter of movement that reminded me she was still here. Relief did not flood me. It settled like a stone in a jar, measured, undeniable. I whispered to the glass that tomorrow I would return with proof that love can sharpen into something sharper than rage, paperwork, and persistence, the only weapons I had ever truly trusted. 2 days blurred into each other, the rhythm of monitors and the hiss of oxygen becoming the background score of my life. On the third morning, I carried a folder of printed statements into Lieutenant Mendez's office. He cleared a space on his desk between a half-empty coffee cup and a stack of case files, and I laid out the pages like puzzle pieces. There was the bank record showing flights purchased under Sophie's account. Portland to Tampa, one way. There was the hotel bill from Coral Dune, signed in a hand I knew too well. And there, in black and white, was the policy from Pioneer Mutual, drawn up just 6 weeks after their wedding, naming Trent as the sole beneficiary with a double indemnity clause. Mendez studied each sheet without speaking, then leaned back and exhaled through his teeth. "This isn't just neglect," he said quietly. "This is motive." He promised to forward the documents to the district attorney's office and asked if I had more. I nodded, because there was always more if you knew where to look. That afternoon, I sat in my kitchen with the blinds half closed, phone on speaker, recorder app open. Oregon law allowed me to tape the call without his consent, and I intended to use every inch of that law when Trent answered from the Florida holding cell. His voice was brittle, still carrying the false confidence of a man who believed charm could outpace consequence. I asked why he hadn't been at Sophie's side. He scoffed, muttered something about bad cell service. I asked why he had purchased life insurance so soon after the vows. He laughed too quickly, then slipped. Sophie's always reckless behind the wheel. I told her to hit the gas, clear her head. She never listens. The line crackled, but the words stayed sharp. It wasn't a confession, but it was contradiction enough, proof that he was shaping the story to suit his freedom. Later that evening, my neighbor, Mrs. Klein, knocked on my door holding a thumb drive. Her doorbell camera had captured voices outside our house the night before the crash. The video showed Trent's silhouette pacing, Sophie's voice rising in protest, and his words spitting through the quiet street. "Just sign the damn papers. We need that money moved tomorrow." The timestamp was less than 12 hours before the guardrail took my daughter's car. I watched the clip 3 times, my hands clenched, before handing it over to Mendez. He loaded it onto his system, his jaw tightening as the voices filled his office. "This ties him to financial coercion," he said. "It paints a pattern." That night at the ICU, I read aloud one of Sophie's old text messages about a silly recipe she had tried. Her fingers twitched around mine, a faint squeeze like a signal sent from far away. I held on, whispering that I was building a case not just for the law, but for her right to heal without fear. My heart knew anger, but my voice chose steadiness. Each word was a thread, stitching us both closer to daylight. By the second week, the corridors of St. Matthew's had become a second address for me. I walked them with the steady pace of someone carrying evidence instead of flowers. Word came from Florida that Trent had been transported under guard back to Oregon. I arrived at the courthouse early the morning of his arraignment, clutching a notebook filled with dates and phrases, each line written like a prayer. When they brought him in, his wrists caught by steel, he looked smaller than the man who had strutted through my kitchen months ago bragging about deals he never sealed. The prosecutor outlined the charges: theft of services, identity theft, wire fraud, and reckless endangerment tied to the night Sophie's car veered off the road. I listened, eyes fixed on the table, feeling the weight of each word as though it were being nailed into wood. The following day, Mendez asked me to attend a session where the district attorney presented the evidence. I sat behind the glass, close enough to hear, but far enough to remain unseen. They placed the policy on the table, highlighted the bank statements, replayed the clip from Mrs. Klein's doorbell, and finally let my recorded call roll out through a small speaker. Trent's voice filled the room. His mockery, his slip about Sophie driving reckless, his impatience about money. His attorney shifted uncomfortably, whispering into his ear, but there was no rewinding what had already been captured. That evening, the doctors reduced Sophie's sedation further. Her lashes flickered against her cheeks, her lips moving without sound. I leaned close, repeating my name, telling her she was safe. Then, with halting syllables, she whispered about the car ride, that they had argued, that she had begged him to slow down, that he had pressed harder on the gas. Her memory cracked open in fragments, but the direction was clear. My chest ached, as if the guardrail had cut through me, too. Days later, during a bail hearing, the judge allowed victim impact statements. I rose from the bench, hands trembling around the sheet of paper I had prepared but no longer needed. My voice steadied as I spoke of Sophie's kindness, her work with children, the way she never let a patient cry alone. I spoke of betrayal, of waking to phone calls that carve holes in the soul, of paperwork that now tethered us to truth. And I said the words I had rehearsed in silence. I am not asking this court for vengeance. I am asking for the boundary between love and exploitation to be defended, because my daughter was too busy surviving to defend it herself. The courtroom fell quiet. Even Trent looked down, his swagger gone, his reflection now only a shadow on the polished table. For the first time in weeks, I felt the air shift, not lighter, not forgiving, but firm, as though justice had taken its place in the room and intended to stay. Spring turned the parking lot trees outside St. Matthew's from bare limbs into soft clouds of pink. Inside, Sophie's progress was measured not in blossoms, but in the number of steps she could take with a therapist at her elbow. The brace on her shoulder clicked as she moved, each sound a reminder that bones knit slowly, but they do knit. I walked beside her during sessions, counting the seconds she could balance without help, whispering encouragement the way she once whispered to frightened children in the pediatric ward. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office prepared its offer. With the pile of evidence, Trent's lawyer conceded that trial would carve him into shreds. They floated a plea deal, guilty to wire fraud, identity theft, and reckless endangerment, in exchange for dropping lesser counts, 10 to 12 years, restitution required. When I heard the terms, I expected to feel cheated, as though justice had been bartered down. Instead, I felt a weary relief. A trial would mean months of dragging Sophie through testimony, reliving every detail. A plea meant an end, and sometimes survival is more valuable than spectacle. The day he stood in court to accept the agreement, I kept my gaze on Sophie's hand resting over mine. She had insisted on attending, her hair still thin at the temples where stitches had been, her eyes shadowed but steady. When the judge asked if she wanted to speak, she nodded once. Her voice trembled but did not break. She told the court she still dreamed of the seatbelt cutting across her chest, of headlights bending as the car spun. She said she wished her husband had chosen love instead of leverage. The room listened, silent except for the scratch of a stenographer's keys. Afterward, life resumed its slower rhythm. Sophie began painting again, first in fragments, small strokes on scraps of paper, layered with glue and watercolor. She said she felt like she was piecing herself together. By early summer, the scraps became canvases. She arranged an exhibition at the community gallery on North Pier, titling it Fragments to Whole. I stood among visitors who traced the textures with their eyes, and I saw my daughter glow with a kind of strength that made machines and courtrooms feel like distant storms. We started a fund with the modest settlement the state granted, the Wholeness Fund, to support victims of financial and emotional abuse. Sophie insisted on giving the first donation herself, from the small savings account she'd built back before marriage. I added my own check, my handwriting slow but certain. One evening, as we left the gallery, Sophie placed her hand on the steering wheel of my car. She drove around the lake with both windows open, the night air tangling her hair. Each mile was ordinary, and that ordinariness was our triumph. I realized then that healing wasn't a sudden sunrise. It was headlights steady on a 2-lane road, carrying us forward, piece by piece, into something whole again. The sentencing hearing arrived on a gray morning that smelled of rain and paper. I sat in the second row, Sophie beside me, her scarf tucked carefully around the fading scar near her collarbone. Trent stood before the judge, in the same suit he had worn to his wedding, only now the shoulders sagged as if the fabric itself refused to hold him up. The judge read out the plea terms, stamped them into permanence, and ordered restitution alongside his years in federal custody. When the gavel struck, the sound was not thunder. It was steady, final, and exactly what it needed to be. Trent glanced back once, as deputies led him away. I didn't meet his eyes. My watch drew my attention instead, its second hand sweeping forward, unbothered, reminding me that time would no longer stop in the middle of my kitchen at the ring of a phone. Time had resumed its ordinary march, and I was ready to walk with it. Sophie squeezed my hand as we left the courthouse. Outside, the sky cracked open and spilled light across the wet pavement. She tilted her face to the sun, as if it might write a new line across her skin. We didn't speak of him again that day. Instead, we drove to the gallery to check on her exhibition. Visitors moved slowly between canvases, murmuring in low tones. One woman pressed her palm against her heart, eyes wet, and whispered, "This is exactly what I needed today." That evening, Sophie asked if I trusted her to drive us home. My instinct was to guard her, to keep her in the passenger seat forever. But I remembered my own words in court about the boundary between love and exploitation. Love defends, but it also releases. I handed her the keys. She guided the car along Lakefield's quiet roads, both hands steady on the wheel, her breath measured but calm. With each turn, I felt my shoulders loosen. When we reached the house, she laughed, a clear, unbroken sound I had almost forgotten. Later, I wrote down everything I had learned. Justice isn't the sudden storm Hollywood loves. It isn't lightning striking at the perfect dramatic moment. Justice is a stack of documents signed in triplicate, a case number written in black ink, a mother refusing to blink while banks and courts line up behind her. It is love that chooses persistence over rage, clarity over chaos. As I turned off the lamp, I looked at Sophie's newest canvas leaning against the wall. It shimmered with torn paper and bright paint, a collage of wounds and light. For the first time in months, I felt whole. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.